Today's episode of the Know Your Gear podcast is brought to you by Patreon members, channel members, and viewers who like and subscribe. Thank you for making this possible. The Know Your Gear podcast.
Today, we're doing a bonus podcast with Taylor Cox from Amplified Nation. He's going to be answering kind of like I'm on the hot seat every Friday. You're on the hot seat today. And this is probably a great subject to start with. There's a lot of what's the best? And don't answer yet because I want to give you the variations that they all seem to be hitting. What's the best Dumble in a box pedal? And then, of course, what pedal sounds like a Dumble? What pedal? You see where this is going, right? So, yeah. And I think this is interesting because you make very expensive, very boutique, high-end amplifiers, and I think if I had a pedal guy on, it would be like, oh, it's there's 1,000 pedals that sound great. But I'm really curious, and I think they're really curious to know, what does someone like you with a let's say a very keen ear and obviously a very discerning taste in high-end amplifiers, what do you think of pedal amp in a box pedals, Dumble pedals? I mean, just thoughts on them.
So I'm not a big pedal guy. So I just disclaimer right there. So I haven't tried all the pedals, but obviously, I'm got a good pulse in the industry, and I've definitely had a few come through the shop. Some that come to mind is the Zen Drive. I thought was a great pedal. The Dumbleoid, and why I thought the Dumbleoid was cool is, it kind of did all the Dumble stuff, like the controlled feedback and the note flipping and all that stuff, a lot. It was almost like it exaggerated those features of the Dumble amps, but it made it so fun, because all your notes would go off into feedback, and it had this really kind of throaty growl to it. We had a pedal for a while, the Big Bloom. That was also great. We're thinking about coming out with a new version of that. But I really thought the Zen Drive was good. And I remember there were some other ones that came out that really held their own. I think it was the Ethos. And right. Also Van Wielden came out with one, the Royal Overdrive. And I tried that one and liked that one a lot too.
So like you, I'm not a huge pedal guy. Pedals to me are a necessity item. It's like sometimes you just need one. You go to jam with somebody and they got a Hot Rod Deluxe, and you're like, okay, I'll bring something that I can, front that amp with.
Yeah.
But what's funny is that when I think of, in my experience, and this is why I want to get your take, because I think your take will obviously be better. In my experience, when somebody says, I'm looking for the best Dumble in a box pedal, I would say, I think you're better off with a good boost pedal and a compressor to get whatever amp to simulate what the Dumble's doing, not what the Dumble sounds like. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. I mean, when I think of a Dumble pedal, I think of the attributes that I get from a Dumble amp that are really unique to those style of amps. As I mentioned before, the note flipping is the biggest thing for me. Can you sit in a spot and get the guitar to go into feedback? And that is just the coolest feeling ever, when it has the infinite sustain. And then do you get the chirp? It doesn't sound like a saxophone. Is it hunky? That kind of stuff. And that's not, you can get that out of a Dumble style amp, but even that stuff doesn't come out of every Dumble style amp. It's got to have kind of just the right preamp. You got to sit in the right spot. You got to have the right pickups going into it. The guitar kind of has to be matched with the amp. But sometimes these pedals, like I mentioned, like the Dumbleoid, I really felt kind of over exaggerated some of those things. And it just really pulls it out for me. So I can be all right, this is a Dumble in a box because it's doing these 3 or 4 things.
Yeah.
And when you think about, are you going to get the same response? You're not. You know what I mean? It's a pedal.
Right. It's funny to me. The first time I played some of your amps, it was the first time that I understood what I was doing beforehand. What I was doing was exactly what I said. I would get an amp, like a Fender amp, a Marshall amp, and I was always running some kind of boost and compression, right? Because what I was trying to do is to get lower amounts of gain to sustain for longer, right? Because I know you can get tons of sustain if you just run Metal Zone, right? Get just so much distortion, the notes just hang out forever, but it's just so fizzy. And the first time I started playing, some of your amps, that's what I noticed. Was the thing that I was searching for was I seen a couple players do this, and of course they're always amazing players like Eric Johnson or something. They play a note and the note is filling up so much sound, you play a chord right? But they would hit just a note, not a solo, like in a song, just playing a note, and the note would sound full and it would like plume out.
There's the overtones, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why I like that question, but it's kind of funny. I know everybody wants to, just have, like, I get it. Everybody wants like a $300 version of a $3,000 amp. Who doesn't? Right.
Yeah, right.
But I think those are, it's funny. The second one you said, what was the Dumble? What did you call it?
The Dumbleoid.
I've never tried that one.
So
So
it was made by a guy in Japan named Shin.
yeah.
And he came out with it, I don't know, maybe 2012, 2013. And it had like sticky labels on the front. So it was a regular kind of like 1590 enclosure.
Right.
And there's Elmo labels, those ones you used to like squeeze.
Oh yeah.
And it would print out and they were selling for $600 a piece. And it would have like sticky labels on the front. So of course it caused like so much drama on the gear page. All these guys, is the pedal worth it and all the stuff, and it was gooped. It was funny. I actually had a bunch of guys approach me from all over the world. I had guys from Australia, from Europe, and the States, and they all threw their money in together. And they said, "Hey Taylor, like I'll send you one of these Dumbleoids. We'll buy it, and if you can clone it, we'll buy copies from you." And I was like, at the time, like I wouldn't do it now, but you know what I mean? It was like 12 years ago. I was like, sure, let's do it. So they sent me a Dumbleoid, and we ended up reverse engineering it and kind of making our own version.
Oh,
So
nice.
we had the big bloom was ours.
Yes.
And it definitely like had some liberties. Like it wasn't an exact clone, and we put it on a PCB, and we were still hand wiring them and stuff. But yeah, the big bloom was great. We built that I probably built like 500 of them, and that's a really cool overdrive. We're actually thinking about kind of re-releasing a version of that later this year. Like
I think that would be great.
Second version, yeah, totally.
Because it's to me, to me, I like the idea that when high-end amp companies like you make a expensive, real high quality pedal, and the reason why is I like that so much better than when you make a inexpensive version of your amp. Instead of making a really bad version of your amp, make a really great version of a pedal. Because really, ultimately, the two customers that exist, besides some of the addicts out there just buy every pedal because, I mean, they're, hey, we're all kind of guilty of that some way. But I mean, the two real consumers are, I don't have $3,000 to $5,000. So this is how you can experience a small piece of the Amplified Nation experience, for less, right? And I've seen it interviewing the professional musicians, and I've interviewed so many now. They all seem to have this, like, they want their gear, their rig, and nowadays, 20 years ago, it would have been a different story, but now they want their rig in two versions. The real version where they play, they're playing the Super Bowl, they're playing, in front of thousands of people, they're bringing the real rig, right?
Yeah.
But then there's show up in San Francisco or New York tomorrow, right? And they need it all to fit in a gig bag on a plane, right?
Yeah, the fly rig, right?
Yeah, the fly rig. And so to me, sometimes you become at least for me, you become dependent on your gear. In other words, you're used to them doing something, especially your amps. Look, if you're lucky enough to fall in love with a Hot Rod Deluxe, you'll find one everywhere, right? But if you fell in love with something like the Amplifonics and Gain, it's really hard to show up anywhere and say, okay, let me find an amp that's like this. You're not going to find an average amplifier that's going to pull off some of the stuff that amp's pulling off.
Dude, I've thought about making like a lower end amp before, and I just don't think it's where I want to take the brand. Like, I like kind of being like a step up. Like, and that's what I want people to, when they play Amp Nation, like I want them to feel confident that they've got the best thing under their fingers. So if we were to do a pedal, it would be the same deal. Like I want like the highest end pedal, the highest end components put together the best way, something that really feels good when you play it, just like our amplifier. So exactly what you're saying, like, if we're going to have like a less expensive product, I want it to be, the upper levels of an overdrive pedal. Right. So you have that same kind of, high-end brand feeling and confidence when you're playing the Amp Nation pedal, the same as you do when you play one of our amps.
Yeah.
So, but we're getting there, man. I don't know. Like the pedal thing is like, we're so busy with amplifiers right now, and pedals have really never been like something I've dove into. Even the Big Bloom was just like kind of a copy of something. So it'll definitely be kind of a new venture for us if we do it. and probably won't be until the fourth quarter if something comes out, but it does sound fun.
Yeah, I think it would be fun. So let's jump on to another topic, another fun topic. Let's see. And what's funny is there was so many questions, but like I said, a lot of them were overlaying the same kind of the idea.
Yep.
One of the ones that I enjoyed, and I think what's great about your amp line is your amp line answers this question. They want to know when people talk about the Dumble sound, but yet then they hear that each Dumble was made for a specific player and all Dumbles are different. So how is there a Dumble sound if all the Dumbles are different?
Well, there's, like I mentioned with the pedal question, I feel like there's attributes to the Dumble sound that are consistent throughout most of the models. So, like, for example, when you hear like John Mayer's tone, right, there's a little bit of compression on the front end of the note, and it makes it sound like it pops just a little bit. And to me, that's a Dumble thing. When you just hear like that, it's almost like a plunk. And when you hit the note, it just kind of like boom, right in the front, and then it fades off. And to me, that's part of the Dumble sound. You hear that in models like the Steel String Singer style amps. You hear that in the clean channel of an overdrive special. And the other thing is the controlled feedback and note flipping. So note flipping is a term that like not everyone knows what it is. It sounds really cool though. And what that really means is like if you hit a note, does it flip into feedback? So you're sitting there, sometimes you got to get right in the right spot, with your guitar, but is there that infinite sustain? And to me, that's also the Dumble sound. So the compression on the front end of the note, the note flipping, and then, yeah, I mean, there's versions of the overdrive special that are different. Kind of in the 70s and 80s, the amps were a little more kind of throaty and raw, like when he was working with David Lindley and, kind of some of the slide players. And then when he started working with Robin in the 80s, I think that's really when the more typical Dumble sound started, with Robin's playing, where it had kind of a chirp to it, and it was real chewy and kind of like saxophone-like. So if you play one of the 80s style amp, which is a preamp called the High Plate Skyliner, that amp is going to like literally feel like you're playing a horn. And I think that's another kind of attribute of the Dumble sound as well. So, there's typically there is some difference between the amplifiers. But I think that point is kind of taken a little bit too seriously. Like we're talking like when he was tuning amps for someone, like it was the difference of playing like a Les Paul versus a Stratocaster or something, right? So or like a Tele versus a Strat. So like we're talking really subtle differences. Like he might change a couple resistor values here and there, but like the amp wasn't completely different, like he might change a grid stopper. So the amp sounded a little sweeter or maybe a little smoother, like the Robin stuff. Robin's amps, in the later 80s generation is smoother than the early stuff. So I think the differences between the models, you could probably hear them. But I think overall that like the topology and the amps did stay pretty much the same.
That's interesting. You're the first person I ever heard say it like that. Because I hear exactly the same thing everybody else hears. We all hear the same rumor mills, right, of things. And yeah. I've always heard like each one's so different, specific to that artist, that musician. So no two are like. What's funny is that I totally understand the way you're explaining that. That yeah, there's basically I guess what you're getting at is there's I don't want to say a template, but he's got a way of doing it, and then he's just changing small attributes to align to the player's style, right?
Yeah.
No different than how a guitar player might change out the potentiometers or the pickups in a guitar slightly just to adjust. Like everybody's got a Strat, but somebody's got a Strat with 50s pickups and somebody's got a Strat with 60s pickups. One has a little bit more bass response, one has a little bit more highs. But overall, they all sound like Strats.
That's exactly the same thing. Yeah, like when you look at like a low plate classic versus a high plate Skyliner, those are considered two completely different amps. There's like 7 different parts. That's it. Like little teeny resistor changes, The other way that the amp can be voiced differently is like if you're using like 6L6 tubes versus EL34s. But overall, the amp is going to be the same. The preamp is going to be the same. So yeah, I think that point may be kind of like a little bit like overused almost. But there's definitely some differences.
Yeah, that actually makes more sense. So here's the question, the overlay question that I got was, if the Dumbles are so good, why aren't more companies, why isn't like everybody trying to make a Dumble clone if that's the quintessential amp, so to speak?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, that's definitely a good point. I mean, there's been some kind of there has been some larger manufacturers that have come out with some stuff. I mean, VHT came out with a lower end kind of Dumble ODS type product. You know, we're getting pretty big. Two Rock's pretty big. So there are larger companies that are making Dumble style amps, but I think maybe it's part of a few different reasons. I mean, one thing that I can say from experience is there's so much drama in the Dumble world. Like there's people talking crap, there's secretism, you know, there's a lot of competitiveness. The amps are they're all like, you know, they're hand built, they're priced high, you know,
Right.
and it's also, you know, there's a lot of criticism for that. You know, people don't think it's worth it. They haven't tried the amps before. People can't afford it. They think you're overcharging. You know, you can get a Fender amp for $2,000. Like, why spend $4,500 on a Dumble style amp? So, you know, I think there's a couple of different reasons. But you know, a lot of the larger amp brands, like I think that maybe the Fender stuff and the Marshall stuff has just been around for so long that it appeals to more people, right? So if you're trying to sell, you know, 1,000,000 amps, like would it make more sense to have a Plexi clone? You know, that's
Right.
been used for the last 40 years on every single classic rock recording and, you know, all the new heavy metal stuff. Like, I don't really know, but I think that as the brand, the Dumble brand, kind of expands more, I think we will see kind of more opportunity there. I mean, we're in Sweetwater now. You know, that was a pretty big jump. There was no Dumble style amps at Sweetwater last year.
Right.
So I think it's kind of getting kind of out to more people, but there's still so many people that have really just never heard of the Dumble stuff. There may not be as much kind of market share out there is with the Fender or Marshall style stuff.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I think out of everything you said, I think the biggest thing I would say from my perspective is the market share. You know, um, I've talked about this in the guitar world, guitar playing world, not amp side, right? That a lot of high end, in my experience, a lot of high end, very boutique guitar and bass builders have tried to do import lines and they fail horribly because they don't have the brand recognition with the average player. And so I use Zahn, and I mean this no disrespect to Zahn because I like his basses so much. But when he did
Yeah.
his first import line, I was a dealer for them, and it was such a hard thing. Somebody come in and is like, "What's a Zahn bass?" I'm like, "Oh, they're really high end, you know, basses with graphite necks, you know, carbon fiber necks." And they're like, "Oh, this have a carbon neck?" Like, no, this is wood because it's made in China. This is the import line for 700
Yeah.
bucks, and it's really hard. It's like if somebody never heard of a really fine hand built, you know, like sports car, you know, and then you're like,
Yeah.
here's an economy version of it, and you're like, I don't know what the high end version is. How do I know what the value of the economy version is? So I
Yeah.
think
So
that's
do you want to spend your money like educating the customer on why this is good? I mean, that could be part of it too. I don't know.
yeah.
Like when you say import brand, you mean like a kind of lower end,
Yeah,
like made
yeah, yeah,
overseas, like
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Using the, I like to call it the clone concept, right? Clone my product somewhere else in a less expensive environment, and then bring it out.
Yep.
Um, I I find, you know, it's funny. A side note, you know, this is a sideways to go on this with your amp line. Um, as someone who's experienced a lot of the Dumble style amps, obviously I had a two. The first time you sent me an amp, I had a two rock. I got rid of my two rock because I liked yours better. I still love two rock. Don't get me wrong. I just liked what yours was. Yours was doing something that, well, first of all, in all fairness, the two rocks that I owned before and the two rock at that time, which was the Studio 35 that I had, was, although very expensive, a more affordable version of a more expensive amp they had, right?
Yeah. Was that like the PBG
Yes.
area? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so your amp gave me what I was hoping that amp would give me. Even though yours is expensive, yours was actually priced a little, you know, a little better than theirs, right? Um, but what's interesting is I bought a two rock the same way a lot of people bought a two rock. You know, like Eddie Van Halen put PB on the map, right? And Music Man on the, John Mayer put two rock on the map, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, talk about guys like me not knowing what a Dumble. I never probably heard the word Dumble until, because I mean, even though I was a huge Santana fan and, you know, and Jeff Beck fan and or sorry, Robin Ford fan and stuff, it was John Mayer, right? All of a sudden, John Mayer's talking all the time about this mysterious amp that this unicorn amp, as he actually put it. And then when you saw him with Two Rocks, I never even saw an advertisement. My brain put two and two together. Like, oh, he likes this unicorn amp. Now he's with this brand. That must mean these are somehow connected. And so I got it. And actually, I didn't get the sound that I was trying to get his sound, like everybody, right? You're trying to get that smooth, like you said, that smooth compressed, tone. But what's interesting about your amps is as I was going through all the models, I thought for sure, like, they would be very similar, like super similar,
Yeah.
and if and you'll probably remember this, you'd be like, hey, you want to try another one? We'll do another video. And I was like, instinctively, I was like, no, like, I don't want to review four Fender Strats in four different colors.
What am I going to say?
Yeah. What are you going to say? You're like, this one's red. Yeah. Right. They all had something similar, which is that beautiful sustain thing they all do. They all have this way of sustaining forever. Which I think actually has to do a lot with obviously your amp design, but also what I notice is really nice hand-built amps just tend to sustain. And I think that's probably because they buy at that price point, you can buy a better transformer, you can buy better components because the consumer is ready to pay for what those things are going to cost.
Yeah, totally.
But to me, like I don't want to mess it up. Hold on a second, because I know it's new now. The 6-string sustain and the ampliphonics and gain are as polar opposite to me amplifiers as you could get.
Yeah, they're almost nothing similar.
Right. But, from an outsider looking in, you see two boxes that look similar, right? It's the same amp company. So my brain is like, oh, this is the 6-string sustain with just more gain. You know what I mean? But it's and then to be honest, like or is it out? Is it called the Phoenix Fury?
Yeah.
The Phoenix Fury, again, I was thinking, well, I'm looking at it right now. Looking at those two amps, it's the same amp, almost, right? And so you're like, it's going to be the same. But then yet, again, totally different animals, right? With totally different characteristics and what they can do. And so the reason I bring that up is because that's, I think, what's cool about having you at Sweetwater now is people can experience it in a different way. But also, I think that's one of the things that's tough is that when people see your amp line, it is very diverse, but it doesn't present that way right away. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have 7 models and they all, I mean, there's probably a little bit of overlap on some of them. And some of the amps, like I mentioned the topology before, having 2 channels and a preamp boost and a foot switch that controls the stuff. Like there's similarities on a few of the models that do that thing, but every single amp does something different, and if there's like similar clean channels on some of them. And there's like overlap. Of course, you can dial in, tones that are similar, but each amp has different features. They do things better or worse than one another. And, you can definitely, a lot of them complement each other. So you mentioned before, like the ampliphonics and gain, like that amp does kind of a Marshall thing and a Fender Bassman thing. And then you can, get an overdrive or a Phoenix Fury or a 6-string sustain and like, get almost like 2 different channels and have 2 amps, but 4 different sounds, so there's a lot you can do with it.
Absolutely. I found with the ampliphonics and gain, it's obviously the gain channel is just kicking, right? So it's awesome.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about all the amps is the reverbs are so dramatically different in how they react to the actual amplifier. Some of the reverbs feel more in front of the amp. Some of them feel like a little bit behind the amp. Does it make sense? I don't know if that is.
Yeah. Some of them are bigger than others. Like the Wonderland Overdrive and the ampliphonics have a similar reverb, which kind of sits differently in the mix. Like I think that one is kind of like a little bit behind the amp, like you mentioned. And then, the amps with the send and return controls that have a dwell as the send, and then the return control is the amount of reverb you have in the mix. Those amps have a really big kind of lush, robust reverb circuit. So yeah, a little bit different.
Now, of course, with all these questions, you knew it was going to come up. It's always coming up. Somebody's asking about digital modeling and how long before solid state digital modeling gets the Dumble quality of tone? That's kind of one. And then basically a lot of questions about, with digital modeling, what's the purpose? Do they need amplifiers anymore? You see where all these are going, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so it'd be interesting to hear your take as someone who makes handmade, amplifiers. How do you feel about the digital modeling? How close do you think it's getting? How good do you think it is? What's the
So obviously
shortcomings?
I'm like completely biased on this, as you can imagine. You know what I mean? I love the tone and the feel of a real tube amp. But I work with a lot of artists that are playing digital stuff, and when you're playing, and touring and you're playing these huge arenas and you're playing the same songs every single night, I think there is definitely like a place for the digital rigs. I think that they can be very reliable. I think when you're really trying to dial in a tone and you're playing and the audience is expecting to hear what they hear on your tracks, I think that the modeler can be great. I don't think that anyone in the audience is going to hear the difference between a digital modeler or a mic'd tube amp. And I think that the digital modelers probably have an edge. But those same artists, when they go to the studio and they're recording with those bands, they're not taking the digital stuff. They want a high-end tube amp. They want to sit there. They want to have a connection with those amps. They want to feel it. They want to have almost like an extension of their instrument. They really want to be there and have an organic connection. And I think that's going to be always the difference. I think that it's a great kind of fun experience to sit down and sit with a modeler and have so many different, sounds at your fingertips and be able to dial in different cabs and all that kind of stuff. But I think when you really want to sit down and you had a stressful day at work and you want to come home and really kind of dig into the guitar, I don't think you're ever going to get the same feeling as you do with a high-end tube amp. I think there's always going to be an edge the tube amp has to connect you to the instrument in a way that a modeler can never touch. And I think, you're even seeing the same thing right now with cars, right? The electric cars that have like a zillion horsepower. Like I think it's the same thing. You drive a V8 or a V10, that's going to be a different feeling than a Tesla that goes 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. And I think it's the same thing with guitars. Like if you're sitting down with a 100-watt amp, I mean, there's days like, say I have a stressful day at work, like I'll go into the warehouse here and just rip a 100-watt amp, right? And, we can turn up to gig levels in here. We've got a 2,000 square foot warehouse. And there's just never a better feeling, and I don't think it would be the same thing sitting in there with a modeler and trying to blow off some steam. And I just think that the tube amp, I think they both have their places. I think the modelers are great, but I think the tube amps are always going to win in situations like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm on the same page. My theory actually for the future, and I think we talked about this last time we did a podcast together, which actually is funny because what I said then is more accurate now than it was then, which is I think the future is, especially with companies like Tonex, who are making a $400 modeling system now that sounds really good. Modeling technology, it's like a lot of like the internet and a lot of things. It's going to destroy the C average student. It's going to destroy the average amplifier.
Mm-hmm.
So the amplifiers that are okay, they're going away. Right? Like it's going to be, you're either going pure, right? It's kind of, it's like, you're either going for the best quality amplifier or you're going to go modeling. I think that's where this eventually all ends. We see it in so many other places. Like we talked about the other day on the podcast, kids collecting records, you know what I mean? Right? They're going, even though there were CDs and CDs sound great, but they're going pure analog. They want pure analog, right? Or they're just streaming it on their phone and listening through it, a little half-inch speaker, right? And kind of like you said about electric cars versus like the old style cars. I think what's going to happen is like you said, sure, well, I grab a Tonex, throw it in my gig bag and, run a line out to a PA for a gig where the audience is the focus, so yeah. I'm presenting to an audience and all that matters is my job is to make it sound good for them. But once I want my personal moment, I'm not grabbing the Tonex. I'm going to grab a nice amplifier. And I think what's going to happen is, and I really believe this, that although I think we're going to be a long time where dudes have a lot of guitars, I think you're going to see where instead of having walls of amps, these guys, all these having tons of amps, they're going to have a few choice, beautiful amplifiers, and then a Kemper or an XFX or whatever technology, especially if AI comes in and I get to just go, yeah, give me the Wind Cries Mary tone, and AI just does it, right? And talk about like what you're talking about earlier. Talk about for doing a job. That's great, right? I tell it to do the thing. It makes the guitar sound that way. I present it to an audience. Things are fantastic, but I'm not going to sit there and have an intimate moment with an AI generated tone.
Yeah, there's just the connection isn't the same. And earlier we were talking about the attributes of the Dumble, and things like the controlled feedback and the note flipping. Like, I don't think you get that from a modeler. Like, it's never going to be the same. You're not going to have the interaction. I get a lot of guys that will, there's some Amplified Nation profiles out there, and I'll get a lot of guys that will try those and then want to buy one of our amplifiers.
Sure.
But I never feel like I'm competing against the digital kind of market. And I don't think it's going to be something that takes all of us out. I really don't. And it sounds like a great, like, fun experience. Like when you talked about the AI, like, I'm like, man, I would love to sit down with that for a little while and just see where I could take it. But really that connection is different. You know what I mean? It's like, similar, like if you play like an acoustic guitar, you know what I mean? You like really feel it in your body. Like, what do they have, like a AI generated acoustic? Like, it's not going to do the same thing,
I had an interesting experience with one of your amplifiers in a weird way. And here was the experience. I want to say cloned it, not cloned it. What do they call it? I profiled it on my Kemper.
Profile, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, here's what's funny about this. I don't think I would have ever put this together if I didn't happen to do this. I did it because, again, like I said, I was like, hey, look, I'm not going to drag that somewhere right now, right? But I'm like, oh, my Kemper's got a 300 watts digital power amp in it. So it's like so to me, instead of, this is why I was talking about the future, instead of grabbing a average little toaster amp and taking that to somebody's house, and put it on his cabinet and playing all night, I was like, oh, I'll take my Ampliphonics Again profile in my Kemper, throw my Kemper down and do it. And it's not the same, right? It's one of those things where it's vibing the right way to whoever's listening, right? But it doesn't feel the same. But here's where the weird thing happened. So then I thought, well, maybe what I'll do, because I was like, well, I'll record with it. And I was recording, it's just not vibing right. I go, I know what I'll do. I'll run it through my aux, right? So now I'm running this through the aux, which is simulating a cabinet and a room, and I'm doing stuff with it. It was better than the Kemper. I was like, oh, this is cool. It's better, right?
Yeah.
It's really good. I'm really happy. And then for some reason I go, well, let me mic it up real quick. And mic it up. And that's even better, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And then it's like, and then it made me think in reverse, like, wow. So I start with great. And then I go to, it's not so great. Like I said, it's the run to the C minus, student, right? It's like, it's an A student. Now it's like a B minus. Now it's like a C minus, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I came up with that theory that I think this is where we land. We land with, if I got asked this a few weeks ago, because everybody knows I'm a huge Princeton fan. I like Princeton amps a lot. And I have a hand-wired one. I have the PC board one. That, to me, like little practice amp, it's my favorite little practice amp in the world. Because it's 10-inch speaker, it compresses really quickly, right? But funny enough, all of the Amplified Nation amps do that too. Like if I'm running through them, other than size, I mean, like I'm looking at my Princeton now. My Princeton amplifier is about the same size as the head almost, right? Just about 4 inches taller.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the funny part about that is that's what made me start thinking about that theory. Like, wow, okay, I think this is where we go. Remember, I used to have a ton of amps behind me all the time too. And I literally only have like my hand-wired Friedmans now, my Amplified Nations, these hand-wired Fender amps, right? And I'm not a hand-wired snob. It's not even that. It's just, if I'm not playing the Kemper Tonex stuff, it's got to be the best. It's got to take me to another. I got to go from C student to A student. Like I got to jump back into a
Yeah.
world that is a different world, right? So I don't feel like I'm playing a slightly better version of the profile. You know, I want to feel
Yeah.
that amazing connection. And the only reason
You know, part,
oh, go on.
I was gonna say part of it is like, just feeling confident about your tone too, and not being so distracted when you're playing, thinking like, am I getting the best? Is this the best it could be? For me at least, that's gonna screw me up. If I'm playing and trying to, if you're overly critical about how you're feeling and how you're playing and how you're sounding and is the amp reacting right, like, is that a really a great experience? As opposed to being like, hey, you know what? Like, I know I am sounding my best. I know I've got the best tone possible. If you're in a room and you're trying to impress, 300 people at your gig, like, wouldn't you want the best feeling possible for yourself to know that you're doing your best and you're sounding your best? And, at that point, like, you've given yourself all the edge, right? Like, to get there. And for me, like if I was, questioning everything, like, did I mic this thing up right? Do I have the right, aux profile, all this kind of stuff? Like, that would not be a great experience.
I I agree. So let's jump to another one, and then we'll go. We're going to talk about some updates with Amplified Nation. Let's see. It says again, what's great is they sent so many questions in for you, which is great, but a lot of them overlap. So I didn't want to hit you with the same, same question 5 different ways. And you can imagine a lot of people are just interested about the basics, which is pedals, modeling, the the Dumble hype, so to speak. What is it and why is it? The I think we actually hold on. Let's see if there's one more. Oh, here's a good one. This one is a really interesting question about speakers. And they wanted to know, because you've done so much research, on Dumbles, obviously as a baseline, so to speak. I know we've talked about this before. Your amps are all modified versions of Dumbles, in my opinion, right? Not just a clone. It's like it's got some things you like more, and you've done. But I think what they're getting at is like, what's the importance of speakers? What kind of speakers do you recommend? What's the best way to get the best tones out of your amps with speakers?
Speakers is just basically a whole nother world, and it's really what is in between the amp and your ears. So it is very important. It really starts out with the speaker cabinet, I think. And there's a lot of customers who call and they want to know the differences between a 1x12 and a 2x12. And traditionally you're going to have a more focused sound with a 112. You're going to have a bigger sound with a 212, maybe a little more punchy. So I think that's kind of where the whole thing starts. As far as the speakers go, we generally sell Celestion stuff. I really like the Celestion G1265 as kind of like a modern focused sound that retains a good amount of headroom and really lets the amp breathe well. It's a great speaker that works in a combo, works on a 2x12. And then we have the Celestion Creamback that we like a lot. The Creamback adds a little bit of vintage warmth. So maybe for a customer who's looking for a little bit of breakup on the speaker, like I think that speaker works really well with the ampliphonics and gain. I think it sounds great with the Dirty Wonderland. That's just kind of like a little bit of breakup, like I mentioned, vintage warmth, but a similar EQ to the G1265. So those are both great speakers. And then we have a WGS speaker that we like a lot. So a lot of the vintage Dumble stuff, the guys used to use the Electro Voice EVM 12L, which was traditionally a loudspeaker. So it's a 200-watt, really heavy driver, huge magnet on the back. It's a heavy speaker. And because of the power capabilities, it does not break up at all. So you can throw basically anything at the speaker and it's going to be really representative of what's going into it. So it's not going to color the sound. It's not going to break up. Those have been awesome. The warehouse model that we have is the WGS 12L, which is kind of their version of that Electro Voice speaker.
Oh, okay.
We were just having like we were a dealer for Electro Voice, but it was just kind of a pain to get the speakers that quickly, and it took a long time. So we started using the WGS stuff, and I really like that brand. It's made in the U.S. So we've been using that 12L speaker. So for guys that really want a ton of headroom, no speaker breakup, maybe you want to run a 100-watt head into a 1x12 cabinet and get a little more compression. that WGS speaker is great. Or if you want to do, obviously, the Electro Voice still makes a classic version of the EVM 12L. But then there's like, obviously, I mean, there's so many other speakers. There's Alnico's, there's, Celestion makes a great one. I think it's called, is it called the Cream? The Cream Alnico? That one sounds great also. They're super expensive, like $300.
Yeah.
Those are great speakers. But yeah, it's a little tough for us because like I end up buying the speakers in like pallets of speakers. I'll buy like 60 at a time or maybe more. So it's tough for me to have like a really big selection of speakers. So we've really kind of honed in on those three. Obviously, we can do other things if people want them. But there's great other, there's other brands and there's other speaker models that sound great. Like I've heard good things about the Scumbag stuff. I've heard really good things about some of the Eminence. I think like is it the red coat maybe?
Yeah, the red coat's nice. It's a Celestion style speaker. It's really good.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that one. But yeah, I think the Celestion stuff is really kind of where my ear kind of gravitates towards. And again, that WGS is pretty good too.
Well, that's one thing that I like that you do with your cabinets is you can order a cabinet with or without speakers. Right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And I think that's great because, so I would imagine, I'm imagining that most people that are in the market to buy one of your amps, they've been around a little while. They've accumulated some things. And one of those things they've accumulated is nice speakers, in speaker cabinets and stuff. And sometimes like the idea of buying a cabinet with two speakers you really don't want, you're already going to pull them out and stick other speakers in there. I wish more companies would offer that. Like Marshall. I wish Marshall would just sell a cabinet without putting speakers in it sometimes because I don't want the speakers they offer. And then you're getting speakers, throwing them on Craigslist, meeting a guy at a Walmart parking lot. It's like a weird.
It's so hard to ship too. You don't have a speaker box.
Yeah. You're like, so I mean, that's one of the things that I think that's really cool about what you guys do. It's like you said, that way, they can have, if they have a specific speaker they want to try or they can do it.
We sell most of the cabs loaded. It's pretty rare we sell something unloaded, but definitely do it, and we'll include the wiring and like the speaker mounts and stuff like that for the customer. So if they want to,
sorry,
if they want to put their own speaker in, they can do it.
Out of all the amps I've tried of yours, I've had really good results with the creambacks. They've always seemed to, they don't seem to, like you said, speakers are kind of a funny thing. They add and subtract, right? I mean, that's what's great about them. They really kind of color the tone a lot. And so I'll try to do a couple of speakers, and I always find myself coming back to a creamback as like just a staple for all the Amplified Nation amps that works great. In fact, I think it was your amps that really cemented that for me. For years, I was always going between the darker, the darker Vintage 30 sound. I was like, because that was the speaker. The Vintage 30 for me was my first real speaker.
Me too.
You always got an amp with like the cheaper speaker, and then one day you got a Vintage 30. You're like, this is what it's supposed to be. And
they like the coolest label too.
Yeah,
V30.
Like and so I would always go back and forth between those, and then the greenbacks, the creambacks, stuff like that. And I just found with your amps, I found the creambacks are neutral a little bit. I don't know. Does it make sense? They let the amps.
I get a little bit of breakup from them. I think there's like some warmth to that speaker. What I tried that I really liked was I had a 4x12 Marshall cab, and it had blackbacks in it.
Oh yeah.
From like 78, 79. Those were awesome.
The
I think that's like a creamback style speaker though,
Yeah, the first Eddie Van Halen amps, when they came out, the 412s had his speaker in it, which they still make, which is a copy of a blackback. And I was like, what was weird about that speaker is what I think is cool about it. His amp has so much distortion. It's kind of a weird thing that it adds to, like it's not the speaker I would have picked, but I mean, he is Eddie. So what are you going to say? Right. You're like, I'm not going to argue with the guy, one of the greatest players out there in the world with one of the best tones, and go, he doesn't know, but it was a weird combination for me. But it made me then seek out a blackback, and then, which is essentially like you said, a creamback, greenback. They're all in that same family. So what's it? Is it here? Yeah, here's just some funny. Hold on. My pick tray is an actual
Oh, look at that,
Yeah,
greenback.
yeah. Through all my years of travels, this is I don't ask how. It's what, if you have a music store, stuff collects over time, and you just one day I had one of this old British tray and I go, oh,
Yeah.
this is where my picks go now. So that's what I use, my
So
pick tray.
I have a 2x12. It's right next to me. And it's a blue suede cabinet that I've had for years. And it has two, they're Mesa branded, they're called the Black Shadow, but they're those EVM speakers. And I think Mesa just rebranded them.
Yeah.
And that's what I've used to test, like literally almost every single amp we've built. I still like I play all of them, and I'll power them up and test them. And that has those two EVM speakers, and the cab must weigh like 85 pounds. Like
Oh
it's
yeah.
so heavy, like, but it doesn't move. And but why I like it is I can really just hear the amp. I know that I am not getting anything from the speaker. And so when you're testing something, I think we talked about before, I like to keep like every variable the same. So like the same guitar, the same cab. So that way I know if if I hear something that's off, I can identify it and be like, all right, this amp needs some attention. And because it can be tough to like hear like a wrong component, or just the not a right enough bass, and it might mean we got something wrong. But that's a great cab. So I've dialed everything in on that. But the selection stuff, I think for most people, they're gonna want a little bit of speaker breakup, and
Sure.
they're gonna want the amp to breathe a little bit. And that's kind of why that G1265 or the Creamback, we use the higher end Creamback, the G12M65, which again is a 65-watt speaker. And that's kind of been the traditional stuff for like the Dumble style. That's where Robin plays. And that's what I think Mayer was playing that G1265 when he kind of came up with that two rock in 2007. And, those are just that's the speaker for this
Yeah.
type of sound.
Nice. So let's go to we're going to talk about Amplify Nation now. Let's just talk about the
Cool.
amps. So you guys are in Sweetwater now. That's a big deal. Like some people grasp it, some people don't. Why don't you talk about that? Because it's a huge deal.
Yeah, yeah. So, we've been really trying to elevate the brand and kind of get out in front of more people for the last few years, and really kind of take the company to the next level. So I reached out to Sweetwater. I think it was 2 years ago. It took a long time, and ended up connecting with their buying team. And over the course of about a year, we talked about bringing kind of Amplified Nation in, and I think you've spoken about it on your podcast. Like they're slow to bring on new brands. They vet your brand out, and they really want to see a lot of different things, anything from your social presence to your reputation in the community, and making sure that you can support the amount of volume that they're going to do. It's a big decision for them to bring a brand in.
Yeah.
So it took a while. But yeah, man, we got the go ahead last summer, and then we ended up launching at the end of February this year. So yeah, it's been super exciting. It's really kind of taken us to the next level. They're a great company. We went out there and got to meet basically everyone, on the merchandising team and all the sales engineers, and tour the facilities and stuff. And it was just like so impressive. Their business model is different. They have 650 sales reps that each sell as much as a guitar store. Like,
It's crazy.
and those guys sell everything. They sell guitars, they can sell you a trumpet, they can sell you, a
Yeah.
fog machine, like literally anything that they
I
own. And
oh,
we just had such a great time. So yeah, it's been phenomenal. The response has been great. Obviously it's come with some challenges. We're doing a lot more volume. I had to hire some more folks here. And we're shipping out like just pallets of amps instead of UPS stuff. But we're still doing direct business, and that's actually spiked up too with kind of the more visibility that we've gotten. So yeah, it's been really exciting, man. I couldn't be more thankful for those guys. Everyone's been so great to work with, and we're just really appreciative and grateful.
yeah. Well, what's nice about your business model is because you do I call semi-custom, right? Semi-custom work on the amps. You can do different finishes and stuff. I can see a lot of consumers just going, okay, I'll just go get that off the website, straight for you guys. Cause you got a great drop down menu. You can kind of see it in real time, see what it's going to look like. And then you have the customer who's like, hey, it's in stock at Sweetwater. That's what's great about Sweetwater, is, there's a saying in the industry, a mile wide and an inch deep. It means you go on a website. Sure, they show they have every brand, but it's not in stock, right? It's just,
Yeah.
it's like I said, mile wide, inch deep. Sweetwater stocks, like if they commit to a brand, as you know, they stock it. You know what I mean? They
Yeah.
pull it in, and so consumers are feel safe knowing like, oh, click it. You know what I mean? Tracking number within 3 hours, amps on its way. Fast. And so
Yeah.
yeah, so that's. By the way, on a side note, I took the Sweetwater sales test. It was a nightmare. I videotaped
I
it.
saw that video.
It was embarrassing. So that's why I said when you mentioned that, all that stuff, that was a, I don't know why I volunteered for that stupidity. It's like I was talking like you. They were so nice. I was in the, you're in that giant cafeteria. I'm talking to the employees, kind of like you were probably talking to employees stuff, and they're so passionate. And I'm like, so the next day I walked up to them and I said, "Can I take the sales test?" And they're like, "I don't know. No one's ever done it besides, thing." And so they went to HR, and HR is like, "Yeah, but we can't disclose it. So I don't know what you'd film." And I'm like, "I don't know. Let us worry about that."
Yeah. Yeah. I think you got, what do you go? They have like a 10-week training course, right?
Yeah, 10
Like
weeks.
Sweetwater University.
Yes. Yeah. It was a brutal test, man. I did not enjoy it. Cause like you said, you're like trumpets, keyboards, microphones, like
Totally. And like Dolby Atmos, like literally everything.
Yeah. There was sound engineer questions like this decibel rating dissipates at so many feet, and you're like, what the hell are I'm like, I don't know. But okay.
Yeah, it was, when we first got in there, I didn't really know how it was going to go. Like I was thinking that they were just going to stock, like we'd have like 3 looks, we do like a black Tolex and like a turquoise suede. And we've actually made every single customization option available to them. So you can order whatever you want. You can, any amp nation, is available. And it's such a, there's people that are so kind of like, they just love buying from Sweetwater, and they've made it easy with their financing, and they've made it easy with their gear exchange. You know what I mean? Being able to get full credit for stuff you're selling on their gear exchange. It's been good. So yeah, we're really excited. We're heading back out there in a month to Guitar Fest, and putting stuff together right now. So
yeah, Gear Fest is going to be open to the public this year, I think, for the first time in 3 years.
Public day on Saturday.
Yeah, which will be great. So that's that was, as you know, I did the Gear Fest when they did YouTubers only for the last couple of years, and that was the number one. I don't want to say complaint, but criticism from the community was like, hey, I'd like to go back too, because people love it. It's a real cool event. I know we're getting a little Sweetwater, but if the problem is, I've had this every time we talk to anybody, who's been to Sweetwater. If you've been there and you see it, it's not an experience you see anywhere else. Like that campus, the size of it, the vibe of it.
Yeah.
It feels externally, when you look at Sweetwater, it's a corporate bland website. But then when you go there, it's like mom and pop feeling, because it's all these people who really care about what they do.
Yep.
Yeah. And they ooze it out. You can't hide that stuff. You know what I mean? You can't hide, I've learned in this industry, if you get us alone, like some people in the industry, like if you get us alone, we start talking about sales and figures and the market. But it's great when we're alone and we're like talking about amps and guitars and picks and bands. Speaking of bands, let's talk about Pearl Jam.
Yeah, so Pearl Jam has been playing our stuff live, which has been really exciting. I started working with Jeff Amon a few years ago and built him he plays guitar amps in his bass rig. So I built him a 100-watt bombshell back in 2021. And we were kind of bummed it didn't like get into the rig. He's got a very complex setup with, he plays like 6-string, 12-string, upright, like all this different stuff. So anything in his rig can, really has to have a lot of flexibility, and it's tough getting like a guitar amp to work with bass and all. I don't know. So anyway, so it didn't get in his rig, but he was, he does some side projects. He plays guitar, so he ended up using the bombshell. He ended up building him another amp as well. But last year, he had that amp in the Pearl Jam warehouse. They have like a huge warehouse in Seattle where they keep all their gear. And Stone had just come back from a recording session where he played a Dumble style amp and just like absolutely fell in love with it. So he was looking for something new, and he stumbled upon that bombshell. And this was last summer. And so they reached out to me and they said, "Hey, Stone wants to play this live on tour." And I was like, perfect. Like, we finally got an amp to be, on stage with Pearl Jam. So I built them another one. And so he toured last year. They did a 9-show run in the Midwest. and they had both. He had two Bombshell 100 watts and a couple 4x12 cabinets, and we actually got to go out and see them and meet the band in Chicago in September, which was really fun. But dude, it was so cool. Like I'm a 90s kid. Like I learned guitar because of grunge and like bands like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and STP,
Oh, yeah.
back when all that stuff came out in the 90s. So, to go to Chicago and like hear these like this unbelievable band that you grew up listening to, like Stone, who wrote like Black, which is one of my favorite songs, like he's playing the intro to that on something that, we built, like was just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome.
so cool. So yeah, they've been they're playing our stuff live again. We're gonna see them at Fenway in September. So yeah, it's really exciting.
And then that's so what's great is obviously, it's exciting when you get iconic guitar players or iconic musicians to play your gear. It validates the gear. I mean, that's just the honesty of it, as you know, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's one of those things. It's important to talk about, like, because look, we all know, no one cared about Fender. We cared about Hendrix. No one cared about Gibson. We cared about Page. That's just the reality of things, right? The artists. I would have never owned a Les Paul if it wasn't for Slash. I just one day that was not a guitar to me. That was the guitar that old dudes had. Right. And then I saw Slash and I thought, this is weird. Why is that guy playing that old dude guitar? And then all of a sudden, next thing I pick one up in a music store and go, whoa, this thing sounds really good. Is that a thing? Like, I didn't know it sounds good. So I think it's great. I think one of the things that's important to talk about, because that ties into what we were talking about earlier, is your amps are the pitfall for you and new builders like you for the next 2 decades is artists are going to be playing your amps secretly because we already know. I'm friendly with Phil X. He's with Bon Jovi. He's paying 26,000 people arenas. Pre-COVID, he was playing 2 Friedman rigs underneath the stage. Now he's playing 2 Friedman heads through, I think, auxes because he can't even have cabinets. I mean, this is a major touring band, and they're not allowed to have stage volume, and no stage volume means no amps. So no amps means I can't see them with the thing to know that that's what I want. You know what I mean? Does it make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Or they're playing a modeler, and there's just nothing.
Yes.
On stage at all.
Yeah. And the irony is, like you said, because I've interviewed them all, they all say the same thing. They have the technology with them on the road, and they have the analog at home in the studios, right?
Yep.
So what we're hearing is the real deal. What they're interacting is the real deal, but what we see is nothing. Right?
Totally.
So it's cool to see them touring with, the real amps, doing stuff, and getting it out there. That's why I just wanted to illustrate that, because some people probably get that it's cool that Pearl Jam has it. Some people may not understand what's so cool about having artists playing an amp. To me, what's more exciting now is 30 years ago, every amp company was on every stage.
Yeah. But dude, even Stone's playing those amps with like baffles in front of them. I don't even know. You can see him peeking out every once in a while in a picture online. But yes, I mean, I'm glad you brought it up, because it's one of those things where like no one does know. I've got a lot of other large touring acts playing our stuff, or some of those artists using them in the studio and not playing it live. So yeah, same deal. Like just like you're saying, like no one really knows about it.
Yeah.
Mostly what's happening now is the brand and the amps are visible because of the YouTube influencers. Guys like you, like out there showing people what these amps can do.
Yeah. It's when I interviewed Petrucci, I said, "You're using Axe Effects," and he goes, "No, I'm using my Mesa. It's on the side of the stage. It's mic'd up." But I wouldn't have known because it wasn't present. You know what I mean? He had it offside stage, and so it's pretty cool. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the size of your company. Because I think that's important. Scale, right? People. I'm going to start this. I just want to hit you with this because I never realized this until a viewer said something. Sometimes you have an epiphany. Like I'm sure you have epiphanies from customers. I have epiphanies from viewers. I was reviewing some G&L stuff, talking about G&L, and somebody said, Phil, and on behalf of the millions of guitar players who play G&L, thank you. And I said, there's not millions of G&Ls, not even close, right? They're not that big of a company, you know, and that made me realize people don't understand the scale of things, you know. And so how big is your team? How big is the, you know, where are you guys?
There's 8 of us now. And yeah, I started out by myself. It was just me and my wife, Allison, you know, just doing this business out of our house for years. Like I just worked out of my garage, and you know, a few years ago, we rented a commercial spot 5 minutes down the road from our house with 4,000 square feet. And I was literally working here by myself for like 6 months. So we started hiring in 2022. And, you know, it's one of those things where you really felt like, how am I ever going to teach anybody how to do this? You know, it seemed like such an uphill battle to you know, have someone and really teach them all the intricacies of building a tube amp. And then I quickly realized that you actually don't have to teach someone the entire thing on day one. Like you can have somebody, you know, prep for the build, or, you know, strip wire, or like build a circuit board. So we really broke down all the different steps of building amps into more of like an not an assembly line, but like steps of assembly. So that way, you know, people could be trained on something that was a little bit easier than, you know, fully wiring up an amplifier, like, you know, tone stack and, you know, all this like foot switch wiring and stuff can be a little bit cumbersome. So yeah, we started hiring in 22, and by the end of the year, we had 2 employees. And last year, I think we hired 2 more employees, and now we are up to 5 guys here on the production floor. We've got a 1099 guy that does our website. My wife, Allison, does our marketing, email, social media, a lot of our branding, that kind of stuff. And I'm here running the company and still, you know, doing some building and firing stuff up and final assembly and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's grown significantly. The Sweetwater stuff is obviously given us, you know, a pretty big bump in sales. But yeah, man, it's a challenge, dude. Like, you know, it's funny, like you learn how to do something like build tube amps, and you finally have a brand that takes off, and you just think like, hey, you know what I mean? Like this is going to be, you know, great. And then you realize that all the skills that you had, like learning how to make an amp sound great, don't translate into running a business. You know what I mean? Like they're 2 completely different worlds. So, you know, it takes a lot of just kind of learning and, you know, jumping into it. And, you know, maybe you don't have the experience and you're nervous, and it's like, you just got to do it. Right. So, yeah, we've really been growing a lot. You know, we're probably 10x from where we were when I quit my job, which is awesome. And, you know, we're still kind of just getting bigger and bigger as we go, but obviously we're doing it carefully and really paying attention to the quality of the amps. You know, I'm still doing all final checks, and we're, you know, putting different processes in place to, you know, make sure we don't make mistakes and things are consistent. But yeah, man, it is definitely a challenge, you know, having a team here and stuff, you know, has its own challenges.
You know, I'm glad you're doing the final like inspections. That's one thing I like about Friedman. You know, he's grown, you know, obviously, and he checks all the amps and signs them. You know, he signs the chassis, and you know, what's funny about that, and this is why, again, that's why I love podcasts, right? Because you can get, you know, people get to learn way more than they'd ever get to learn. They get access to people. You know, my joke is, could you imagine if Leo Fender, we had podcasts back then, what we would have learned from guys like him talking, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But what's funny is what guitar players sometimes don't understand, and it's really important to understand, is, you know, your growth is important, because actually your growth is what's keeping the amp line prices under control. So for people that go, oh, the amps are expensive, because they are, it's nothing wrong with me. They are expensive. It's an expensive product. But if you didn't grow and your demand stayed at the trajectory it was and is, then
prices.
You're right. You'd be like, I'm sorry, guys. It's a 2.5 year waiting list. You can buy one for double retail used. Yeah, used. Right. And guitar players don't understand that. That's like important. And I appreciate that about you, because like I said, what's great is you do have to learn new skills. You have to learn managing, you know, your business skills have to come into play. But more importantly, you have to be crazy enough to go, okay, I think I'm going to teach somebody this. And then, and it's because ultimately, you know, when Rhett Shaw did a review of your amp, he said the greatest line ever. In fact, it made it like, it was so hard for me to do a video, of your amp, because his line was so great, I wanted to steal it, which was, he's like, imagine if Jim Marshall, who actually didn't actually build the amps, but if Jim Marshall only made like 24 Marshalls, right?
Yeah.
What would they be worth? Right. And that's essentially what Dumble did, right? Because he never took a step to make more. They only had one way to go, which is to skyrocket in value because of their limited production, right? And
Mhm.
and this is at the core of it. The core of it is everybody's going to have different opinions. This is just mine. Dumbles are expensive because he didn't make a lot. Like when I mean expensive, I mean 100 grand, right? Whatever crazy prices exist, right? They exist because he didn't make more of them, right? If he would have made more, I'm not saying they would be inexpensive. I'm saying maybe they'd be 20 grand or 15 grand a piece, right? The reality is that exclusivity does drive up price. And so it's great to see that your company's growing because that means, like I said, people probably don't perceive it this way, but your amps are actually, they could be more now. They could be double what they are now. If you're talking about 2022 when you hired your first person. If you didn't hire that first person, I already know because I've seen how your trajectory's gone. Today would be talking about, you'd be going, sorry, Phil, I don't even have the hour to give you for the podcast. I got to build amps. It's a 2-year waiting list.
Right. Yeah. And the more amps you make, the less money you make on every amp also.
Yeah. Yes.
The margins definitely do not scale.
Yes. And that's why I think stuff like that's important for people to see. They learn more from that. And then we'll segue that into the final thing, which is what's new. What's coming out?
New?
What's coming out?
All right. So we are potentially coming out with a new overdrive pedal at the end of the year.
Okay.
It will be a new version of the Big Bloom. I'm not sure of the name yet, but it should be pretty cool. We're working with some folks on that design, and we're really excited. We launched a new amp last year called the Trem Drive Deluxe, which was our version of the Dumble Overdrive Deluxe, which was a amp that was based off of the Deluxe Reverb that had kind of a like really high gain grinding overdrive built into it, but it also retained the reverb and the trem. So that amp is really fun. It's not as versatile as our channel switchers, but it is such a blast. I mean, digging into an amp that is just like dripping in overdrive, that is swelling with trem and has this big reverb, can really be a good time. So, it's been a fun amp. And then last year we also came out with a new 2x12. So we've got a square 2x12 cab that fits underneath all of our amps. Before we were doing a vertical 212 for our smaller amps and a horizontal 2x12 for our larger amps with 2 different size heads. So we have this square 2x12 that's a diagonal, super compact 24-inch by 24-inch model, and that one's awesome. It's really punchy and kind of it's low to the ground but high enough so you can easily access the controls of the amp, which is nice because you can crank it up and not get like the high end hitting you in the ears, but your amp is still up high, which is a good look. Everyone loves that kind of vertical stack look.
So because you said 24, the speakers offside like this?
Yeah, they're offset.
Okay.
Yeah. So that keeps it a little bit smaller. So I wanted to make the smallest 2x12 we could make, but still have it sound big. And really the goal was to have a vertical setup with the larger amp chassis of the Phoenix Fury, the 6-string sustain, and the Trem Drive. And that's what that cabinet did. So we're really excited to launch that. And then we had some changes this year. As you mentioned before, we had to change the names of a couple amps. Overdrive Reverb is now the Phoenix Fury, and the Steel String Singer is now the 6-string sustain. And, really what we were trying to do was differentiate ourselves a little bit from the Dumble brand.
Right.
There's a lot of manufacturers out there that were using those names. And, I think at this point, like, we really want to kind of stand on our own 2 feet. And being a company that has kind of ridden the coattails of the Dumble brand, I think it was time to kind of took a step and kind of, made those amps their own name and their own model so they could have their own identity. Nothing that we have in the lineup is an exact clone of a Dumble. You mentioned before, like, they're kind of all my iterations and my versions of these amps. And although they come very close, we are in no way trying to emulate or be a different version of Dumble. Like, we want to be our own brand. So we've got those 2 new names. The amps have a little bit of a different look. We're really excited to just kind of have them have their own identity. We did not change the circuit, so the amps are still the same. So like all the demos online, that kind of stuff are going to be very representative of what you'll get coming out of the box. But yeah, man. So we're really excited. This has been a very busy year for us, especially with bringing on Sweetwater and a couple other new dealers. We're here plugging away and really just trying to make the best amps we can.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing it. That's for sure. I have a quick question about the Trim Drive Deluxe. So you say it's like inspired like the 65 Deluxe. Does it clean up like the 65 Deluxe? You're talking about the gain structure on it, but can you, if you turn it down, can you clean it back up a little bit or?
Yeah, it cleans up. It doesn't clean up as much. It's kind of like got a it's a unique circuit that has a little bit of a Marshall vibe to it. So you're not going to get the typical Fender cleans, but it'll clean up really well. Because we're using the 6L6 and the 6V6 tubes, you do kind of get that full bodied Fender tone when you clean it up. And typically like the Deluxe Reverb and the guys that have built the Overdrive Deluxe and Sebago Sound has a model. They've kept it at that 22-watt power level with the 6V6 tubes, which is awesome. I mean, you can crank those things up and you get the 6V6 breakup, which is really fun. And, the amp will really grind up a lot. But, I kind of just figured I would keep all the customization options that we do with the other models for the Trem Drive. So you can order that Trem Drive in 50 watts or 100 watts. And obviously, if you're going to get one in the higher power levels, it will stay clean,
Right.
especially the 100 watt. The 100 watt will do anything. But obviously the lower wattage ones will break up even more. And the 22 watt will break up so much that it almost gets into fuzz territory when you engage the trem. It's a fun experience for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's not gonna clean up as much as a Deluxe Reverb, but that's not what it's supposed to do.
And then this is a reference for everybody watching this. If you enjoyed this podcast so far, we did another podcast about a year and a half ago or so, where we went through a lot of the amps and a lot of the power stages, a lot of the questions. So this is also to answer a lot of the questions that I got were actually answered in the first time we did a podcast together. So instead of rehashing that stuff, I said, I go watch that. You can watch another hour and enjoy more of this information, which would be great. On that note, I want to thank Taylor for coming on. We talked about he has employees, but the truth is he's very busy, and it's very appreciative for you to take some time out and come and do this, and educate everybody and talk about these subjects. It's nice because it's nice to have an amp expert, and have access to it. So I want to thank you for answering those questions.
Man, it's so fun getting on here and chatting with you. I watch your show all the time, and I'll see your. I love the new shorts that you're doing. Like it's great just kind of seeing the one questions and stuff.
Yes.
Gives you like a little tidbit of information. So it's so fun getting here, come on and chatting with you and stuff. And I just really appreciate the time. And yeah, the last podcast we did was great. It was well received, and really fun to get on here and do another version.
Well, I like the way you approach things because you said it perfectly earlier. The way I explain to close friends when they ask me about your amps is Dumble inspired. That's about it. You know what I mean? After that, it's his version of it. And I think that's what's great, because I think Dumble obviously did something right, which is why, Bonamassa and Mayer and all these guys, they love him or love his product. But, I like that you, instead of said, hey, I'm just going to, like the clone, I'm going to make a clone,
Yeah.
right. It's like, what else could it do? And like I said, it's really, like I said, it's a really interesting take on the amps. I said this, and I don't know if I told this earlier, but I said this a couple weeks ago. Somebody asked me, they always do that stupid thing where they go, hey, if you can only have one guitar, if you can only have one amp, if I can only have one amp and no pedals, it's the Amplifonics and Gain right now. Because it does the clean and the dirty, and it has reverb, and I can play it quiet and I can play it loud, and that's
very versatile amp.
Yeah. And so I mean, and that says a lot because I have a lot of amps, like a lot of guys, and so there's a lot to choose from. But it's like I told you, I'm a huge Princeton clean fan, and then I'm a huge like Friedman Overdrive fan, and that bridges that gap. It's one of the few amps that can do both things so well.
Yeah, it's funny. I always feel like a snake oil salesman when I'm like, oh, the amp will do Fender and Marshall tones. And I'm like, no one's going to actually believe this. But it really does, man. It does both.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Actually, a little better. I like, you know, I don't, you know, I know it's probably, you got to stay humble, but for me, it does both a little better, right? So the reason I tell you that, the reason I'm saying that is because I want people to have an understanding what I'm saying. When I say it does Fender tones, it does the expensive hand-wired vintagey Fender amp tones, you know, for Fender, right? Nothing wrong with the new mass-produced Fender amps. They're great. But when I say I like this clean as much as my Fenders, I'm talking about like a hand-wired 64 reissue or a real vintage Fender, not so much like a production Fender, which is why I love it so much, because, you know, it's a really amazing clean. And then, like you said, it just has that Marshall overdrive. That's crazy to have.
Yeah, and the low gain Marshall stuff is cool too.
Yeah, yeah,
It's the classic rock territory really easily.
yeah, it's fantastic. So on that note, we're going to let Taylor go. I want to thank all of you guys for hanging out. Like I said, please check out the other podcasts and all the other videos we've done of Amplified Nation. And I guess till the next time, know your gear.
Thanks, Bill.
Oh, you're welcome.
The Know Your Gear podcast.